Hello, thank you all for joining us for this webinar on facilitating community conversations about what's next for West Virginia. We'll be starting in just a few minutes, and in the meantime, find the group chat icon that looks like a little speech bubble, and tell us where you're joining us from and why you're here on this webinar. Hello, thank you all for joining us for this webinar on facilitating community conversations about what's next for West Virginia. We'll be starting in just a few minutes. And in the meantime, find the group chat, the little speech bubble icon on your computer screen in the Fuse window, and tell us where you're joining us from and why you've joined us on this webinar. Also, if you have any technical problems, please type them into me using the group chat, and I'll do my best to resolve them. Everyone will be muted for the duration of this webinar to just cut down on background noise. Hello, thank you all for joining us for this webinar on facilitating community conversations about what's next for West Virginia. We'll be starting in just a minute. And we've got some really great responses in our group chat about where everyone's joining from. It looks like we have some good representation across the state and even in Kentucky. So continue to type into the group chat where you're from and why you're here. And then also throughout the entire webinar, if a question pops into your mind, go ahead and type that into the group chat and we will answer all of your questions at the end. All right. Thank you all for answering our questions. And I hope you can hear me correctly. If you have trouble hearing the audio, you can also join in by phone by calling the number that's listed on our first slide there, 1-855-346-3893. You can go ahead and keep on letting us know where you're coming from, why you're here, and if you have any questions, type them into the group chat, and we'll answer those at the end. I'm going to go ahead and turn this presentation over to Catherine, who will get us started by letting us know what's on the agenda.
Hi, everybody. As Lauren said, my name is Catherine Marina, and I'm with the West Virginia Center for Civic Life. Lauren, I'm hearing some feedback. Can you make sure everybody's muted? Virginia Center for Civic Life. We're delighted to have so many people registered for this webinar today, which I think really represents the deep interest that we've had since we launched this initiative from West Virginians all over the state who want to talk and work together to build stronger economies and stronger communities. So this afternoon, our webinar group includes people who work in state and local government, in nonprofits, colleges, faith groups, nonprofits. Sorry, I'm getting quite a lot of feedback from one of our participants. So, okay, here we go. From colleges, faith groups, community foundations, and healthcare systems. We have elected officials, we have artists, teachers, social workers, farmers, from small towns and large cities all over the state. And many of you are already working or are considering working on convening What's Next conversations. So for those of you who are wanting to participate in the initiative, we'd really encourage you to reach out via phone or email for individual support from us at the Center for Civic Life as your work evolves. So thank you so much for joining us and for your interest in What's Next West Virginia. I'd like to go over the agenda first of all. We're going to do some introductions so you know who is facilitating this webinar. We'll do an overview of What's Next West Virginia for those of you who are just entering the conversation about the initiative. We'll talk about the majority of the presentation will be focused on facilitation roles and tips. And then finally, we'll reserve some time for questions and discussion at the end. So if you have questions that come up during the presentation, go ahead and type those into the group chat in your Fuse screen. You'll see a chat bubble icon that you need to click first to turn that on, and then you can type your question directly into the chat bar, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. So let's start off with a few introductions, just so you know everybody who's leading the webinar. My name is Catherine Moore, as I said, and I work with the West Virginia Center for Civic Life on What's Next West Virginia. And my role is to help coach people and communities through that process, from dialogue to action, and also to help share the stories of communities who are working to turn around their economies. And at the opening of the call, you heard from Lauren Brennan with the West Virginia Community Development Hub.
Hi there, I'm Lauren from the West Virginia Community Development Hub. The Hub has been a partner in the statewide planning of the What's Next West Virginia initiative, and we will be helping communities move from dialogue to action.
Great. And finally, we have Mar Parsai. Mar, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'd love to. My name is Mar Parsine. I am an AmeriCorps Vista serving with the Center for Civic Life, and I come from a background that includes a lot of facilitation and community dialogues.
Great. All right, so let's start off with an overview of What's Next West Virginia. So what is What's Next West Virginia? Well, it's a series of conversations and actions that will take place in communities all over the state in the coming year. What's Next is designed to encourage talking, thinking, and actions based on West Virginians' own ideas for building a more vibrant and diverse economy. The sponsors of the initiative are the West Virginia Center for Civic Life, which is a neutral, nonpartisan nonprofit, the West Virginia Community Development Hub, and West Virginia Public Broadcasting. They're the three major partners. And then we have a coalition of over 20 additional partners from nonprofit, philanthropic, governmental, educational, and faith-based organizations. And you can find a complete list of all the partners on our website, whatsnextwv.org/partners. So it's really important to point out right from the beginning that the Center for Civic Life, and for that matter, the What's Next initiative, doesn't go into communities and organize conversations. You and the diverse planning teams that you'll put together from your community, you are the ones who organize the conversations. The conversations are localized, so you could organize around a town, around a county, around a region. It could be What's Next Belington. It could be What's Next Barber County. Both of those are currently happening. It could be What's Next Northern Panhandle. It could be at the regional level. It could even be based on the sector that you work in. So, for example, some philanthropists in the state are having discussions about what's next for philanthropy in West Virginia. So you're organizing the conversations, but you're not on your own. The West Virginia Center for Civic Life has put together several tools for you, including a guide for conveners that will take you through the steps for planning the dialogues, for spreading the word about the dialogues, and for actually doing the dialogue. And it's available for download on our website at whatsnextwv.org/materials. We're also here to talk you through the process and offer troubleshooting support if you run into any problems. So you can think of us as consultants in this process for free consulting. But again, you and your planning team will be the ones who are actually convening these conversations in your communities. We're seeing them as a series of at least 3 conversations. And the overarching questions for each conversation are, number 1, where are we now? This is a conversation about taking stock of your current work and your assets, and about building a foundation for the future work that you'll do together. So it's a foundational discussion. Number 2 is, where do we want to go? And this is a discussion about the options that you have and that you see for making positive changes in your community around the local economy. You'll be thinking really deeply about all the different perspectives, because of course there won't always be agreement. You'll be weighing all the potential actions and what impacts those might have and on who, and you'll be setting directions together. Number 3 is, how do we get there? And this is really where you'll get down to brass tacks about how you can achieve your goals. So you'll strategize together, and you'll consider the next steps that will be needed to move forward on the action items that your community has identified. And there are a number of sub-questions for each of these bigger questions that will enable you to lead a productive discussion that ends in a set of actions and a plan for implementing those actions. Here's an overview of what the workflow might look like in your community. So you're here in this webinar in this blue box being introduced to What's Next West Virginia. When you're done listening, then if you decide that you want to bring What's Next to your community, you then start pulling together a diverse planning team in your community. This planning team is really the group that makes the conversations happen, and I'll talk more about that in just a second. So they get together and do as broad a job of outreach as they possibly can to members of the community who they think should be a part of the conversation. And they're striving for as much diversity as possible. They're doing one-on-one conversations and invitations. They're doing outreach in the local media, in newspapers and radio and social media. Maybe they're hanging flyers on bulletin boards, whatever it may be. And we've put together a number of outreach tools that can help you in this stage of the process. So sample invitations, sample press releases, a sample outreach flyer. All of these materials are available on our website under the materials section. So once we've invited the entire community, then the dialogues take place in those 3 sessions that I outlined just now. But you could do as many as you wanted, and you can adapt it in any way that makes sense to your community. So where are we now? Where do we want to go? And how do we get there? And from there, communities could form working groups to then carry out the actions that are decided on collectively during the dialogues. And when you get to that stage, or before you get to that stage even, we can help hook you up with action planning resources, so you can think through ahead of time what that action phase is going to look like for your community. So What's Next is really designed not to start from scratch, because we realize there's already a tremendous amount of amazing work that's being done to improve local economies in communities across West Virginia. And I'm sure that many of you on this call today are some of the people who are moving that work forward. So we don't want to in any way ignore the fact that there's already a lot of work happening. But sometimes groups are doing it in isolation and they're not talking to each other necessarily. So What's Next is really an opportunity for all of those groups to come together at the same table, and also to bring in people who aren't involved, but who want to be connected and they want to be active in the life of the community. What's Next is really designed to build on and connect the work that's already being done, but then also broaden the conversation. So when you're putting your planning team together, think about who in your community is already working on this issue, whether that's faith groups, nonprofits, individual leaders, government, and think about reaching out to them to help organize the dialogues and get them involved from the very beginning. But also think about people who might not be affiliated with one particular organization or institution, but maybe they're a community leader who's really well respected, or maybe they're a person who represents a group who is significantly impacted by the issue that you're facing. So how do you get started? Well, the first step is to go to our website, what'snextwv.org. And if you'll notice up in the right-hand corner, there's a tab for getting involved. And if you click on the tab, you'll see a number of options. If you'd like to bring What's Next to your community, go to Organize a Discussion and follow the steps. If you've decided on a time and place for your dialogues already, you can register your discussion and share that information with us so we can post it on our website and help you do some promotion if you'd like. If you don't want to organize a discussion, but maybe you're just interested in attending one if one happens in your area, then go to the attended discussion page, give us a little bit of information, and we'll connect you with a discussion in your area if there's one taking place. You can also share your story with us. So if you think there's something really interesting or unique happening in your community that others in the state could learn from, and we know there's already a lot going on, please let us know. And with our media partner, West Virginia Public Broadcasting, we can help share your story with people across the state who are interested in strengthening local economies. The other really big thing to point out about getting started is you don't have to generate materials from scratch, because we've also created a lot of materials you can use and you can localize. So if you click on the materials tab on our website, you'll see a number of things. You'll see a discussion starter video that is great for setting the groundwork and the context for a discussion. You'll see a sample invitation, an outreach flyer, a press release, and that convener's guide. But the big thing to notice is the What's Next discussion guide. The discussion guide has a lot of cool stuff in it. There's a bunch of kind of fascinating infographics with some information about the economy of West Virginia, what it was in the past, what it is today, and even like forecasts for the future. So that's a great set of tools that you can use to have a more informed discussion. There are also examples of what towns are doing across the state, towns, people, businesses, what they're doing to strengthen their local economies. And then there's also a set of guiding questions for you. So when you convene your discussions, you'll be able to move from point A to point B and find a set of actions that your community agrees upon that they want to carry out. And we'll supply you with up to 30 free copies of the discussion guide. You can order them right there on the materials page, or you can download a digital copy there as well. So you may be wondering, how does all this information that's gathered in the discussions, the ideas, the challenges, the issues, how does this stuff get collected and used? Well, we're asking facilitators to help us do that by filling out a moderator's summary, which you can find in the convener's guide at whatsnextwv/materials. You can email it to us, or we can interview you over the phone. We'll gather all this information and pass it on to a statewide audience that includes policymakers, the media, and the public at large, so that these smaller discussions that are localized can build to a bigger conversation that will benefit the entire state. So we know that that's not an exhaustive overview, but that should be enough information to get you started. Again, our first step is to go to our website, click on Get Involved, and organize a discussion. Now, once you actually get people into the room who are interested in having this conversation, then what? You need to be able to effectively facilitate that discussion. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mar Parsai, who's going to take you through some best practices to make sure that these conversations are as productive as they can possibly be.
Great, thank you, Catherine. So hopefully we are on the slide that says your role as a facilitator. So just to sort of get started, just understanding your role as a facilitator, I'm going to talk about a few things here quickly. The first thing that's the most important is that you need to set a welcoming tone. That way you have kind of a friendly vibe. That way everybody is feeling comfortable and encouraged to participate. And you need to clarify your role at the beginning. Now, we understand that many of you come from very different backgrounds, and you may actually be a teacher, or you may be an expert in a certain field, but in your role as a facilitator, you should clarify that you aren't a teacher, you aren't a trainer, and you aren't an expert. And that is really important, because I'm going to talk to you in a minute about staying neutral. But so just making sure that you clarify that you're just there to help guide the conversation. And you also need to be an active listener. You need to pay attention to what's going on between the participants and what's going on, time wise and everything like that. And then you also need to be staying neutral throughout the conversation, which I'll explain a little more in depth here in a minute. And then you also need to be keeping the conversation moving as a facilitator. And one of the ways to do that is to ask probing questions. So to get people to think a little more deeply about what their perspective is on an issue or how they really feel, and to get other people participating as well, so that you're actually getting to the heart of the issue. And then you need to be mindful of time, because no matter how much time we leave for a conversation like this, it's almost never going to be enough, but you want to use everybody's time as well as you can. So making sure that you do leave enough time to talk about the biggest issues that come up. So the neutrality, what does it mean to be neutral? This is a difficult thing for some people to kind of understand. And we understand that as a person, you probably aren't neutral about certain things. But in your role as a facilitator, you need to behave neutrally. And the ways that you can do this are to make sure that you're not indicating any sort of agreement or disagreement with participants' opinions or ideas that they come up with. And you need to sort of keep your own personal opinion out of the conversation as a facilitator. So avoid using your own experiences to explain a point or to bring up an idea. And you need to make sure that you're encouraging different points of view across the spectrum, so that the conversation gets deep and a lot of different perspectives get brought up. And then you should ask for people to bring up viewpoints that may not necessarily be represented in the group. So if you have a group of people from a very specific location, then ask what people from outside of that location might think. Or if you have a group full of teachers, ask what students may feel about that, or somebody that works in an industry as opposed to as a teacher. So as a facilitator starting the conversation, the first and most important thing is that you need to come prepared. You need to know what the goal of that conversation is. You need to know basically what sort of questions you want to ask and how much time you have. And to start off the conversation, make sure you give an overview of your time together, kind of like what Catherine did at the beginning, saying, we're going to do introductions, then we're going to talk about what's next, and then facilitating and things like that, so that people have a basic idea of how the conversation is going to go. And then so that when you do come back as a facilitator and say, hey, we do need to move on, they understand what the timeline is. And then one way to really create a space where people feel comfortable expressing themselves is to ask the participants to introduce themselves and to say why the issue matters to them, because then people start to see each other as people, as opposed to somebody random. View the guidelines for the discussion, which we'll show you in the next slide, but those are basically just how the conversation should move. So making sure that you are encouraging participation among people, and so that they understand that they're all there for the same reason, because they care about the economy. So the guidelines, there are sample guidelines in the convener's manual, which you can find on our website. But here are just a few examples. Making sure that everybody is encouraged to participate and listen. Making sure that viewpoints are considered fairly and respectfully. And making sure that you're thinking through costs and consequences of actions. Making sure that you as a moderator remain neutral. So these 4 bullets here are just basic ideas that we use generally in our community forums, but you as a group can come up with others if you'd like to add to the group, add to the guidelines. But make sure that the group does agree on this before you jump into your conversation. So as a facilitator, one of the biggest things you have to do is ask questions. And so making sure that you're asking questions with a purpose will help make sure that the conversation flows more smoothly and you use your time wisely. So making sure that you're connecting the issues to the participants concerned. So at the beginning, when the participants are introducing themselves and telling a little bit about why they're there, that's a good time to jot notes and just to see what the different reasons are for people showing up. And then you can bring those reasons up as the conversation progresses. And then you want to make sure that people are really thinking through the potential consequences of any action. So if people are very positive about an idea, it's okay to ask a question such as, is there a downside to this course of action? And then asking participants to think through really what are the trade-offs of potential actions that they bring up is really important, so that they're thinking through truly what the repercussions are or the benefits are of any potential action that they bring up. And then finally, you want the participants to be interacting with each other, so making sure that you're asking questions that aren't necessarily, the answers wouldn't be directed back to you, but that the participants can interact with one another. So, can someone give an example to illustrate what so-and-so just said, so that those two participants will be talking amongst one another. There are 4 basic facilitator moves that are very key to any sort of facilitation, and these moves can work in any sort of conversation, whether that's one-on-one or in a large group or anything like that, just to promote a deeper understanding of an issue or to promote deeper discussion. The first is to ask a follow-up question, and those questions go to the same speaker, but that's just to get a basic, to get participants to think a little deeper about what it is they're really trying to say, or to clarify what their opinion is, just so that the group can have a better understanding of what this individual's opinion is. A reaction question is a question to the rest of the group, which generally refers back to the last comment that was made, and a very easy way of doing that is just saying, are there any reactions to that last statement, or does anybody have a reaction to that idea? And that also helps the participants interact with each other and makes it less of a conversation between you and a participant. And then asking a transition question. This is a great tool to keep the conversation moving. So you can pick up on ideas from other people's comments and say, that's a really good point that so-and-so made. That leads us kind of into this next idea. Does anybody have any thoughts about this idea as opposed to what we were talking about earlier, that kind of thing. So transition questions, reaction questions, and follow-up questions are 3 basic questions that you can use as a facilitator to dig deeper into the conversation. And then finally, paraphrasing is basically when you just take somebody's comment and put it into your own words, and that can help clarify somebody's point for yourself, or if you're confused by something, other people are as well. And always remember that when you're paraphrasing, when you put it into your own words at the end, be sure to say something along the lines of, that's what I'm hearing. Is that correct? Just to give them room to clarify if you didn't quite understand what they were saying. And make sure that you don't overuse paraphrasing. It can be very easy to get in the habit of repeating back to each person what they said, but you want to use paraphrasing strategically and not overuse it. So some of the things that a lot of people want to know about when they're getting ready to facilitate is, how do I deal with challenging moments? And one of the most common challenging things that any facilitator will come across is dealing with somebody that dominates the conversation. That person exists in every group, and they have a lot to say. They're very passionate, they're very enthusiastic, or they just like to talk, which happens from time to time. So there are a couple of ways of dealing with that person. The first is to, when you ask a question, just say, well, why don't we take this time to hear from somebody we haven't heard from yet? Or you can point back to the guidelines saying, we want to leave room for everybody to participate. And if you're taking notes, another strategy would be to say, you can interrupt somebody and say, it seems like you have a really great idea here. Why don't you write that down so we have that captured in the notes? And while you're doing that, we can hear from others. So those are some easy ways that you can interact to curb somebody that talks a lot. Disagreements will probably arise throughout these conversations, which is totally normal, and we encourage that. But as your role as a facilitator is to make sure that these disagreements are productive. So making sure that the participants are understanding the different perspectives, and it's not just a, you know, I think this or I think that kind of thing. You really want them to think through, you know, what sort of situation or life experience has led to these people holding this perspective. And then be sure to keep you know, the focus on the idea and not the person. You don't want personal attacks to come up or anything like that. So you want to make sure that the conversation is sticking to the idea, and then make sure that if people are disagreeing, you summarize those in a very respectful way. This kind of goes back to remaining neutral as a facilitator. You want to make sure that you know, you're not promoting one opinion over another, but that you are clearly and neutrally explaining what a disagreement may or may not be. And you can have participants help in that. You can say things like, you know, it seems like we're having a disagreement here. Does somebody want to try and help us understand where we're talking past each other or what we're disagreeing on? And from there, you can move forward. Basic tips on facilitating, and now I'm going to give it back to Catherine, who's going to talk about facilitating each of the different conversations.
Okay, thanks, Mar. So just as a reminder, as you've been hearing us talk about tips for community facilitators, there could be questions that are forming in your mind. So please feel free to add those to the group chat, and we've added plenty of time at the end to respond to your specific questions. The tips we've discussed so far could be useful in most public meetings or even within your own organizations. But the What's Next West Virginia conversations are intended to be focused on the specifics of your community, taking stock of where you are now, where you want to go, and how you want to get there. When you download the discussion guide from our website, you'll see that there are sections and sets of questions that are specifically focused to help your community examine those 3 parts of the conversation series. And what you're seeing on your screen are 2 pages from that discussion guide that get to the heart of where are we now. You'll see all those questions, but let me just talk about the key role of the facilitator and what you're trying to do in this initial conversation with your community. The first conversation is really an opportunity for those who come to your discussion to consider whatever your community's economy is like now, and also to remember and be mindful of the factors that brought your community to the place that it is now. Some positive things that have happened, some challenges you've dealt with. So this initial conversation, you're gonna look to the past a bit, but mainly that retrospective discussion is really for the purpose of trying to decide what it is about your community's past that you want to retain or recapture. You want to be careful in this part of the conversation that you don't spend too much time on this one particular part. In main part, what you're doing here is you're taking stock of what's currently happening in your community. And there's much creative ongoing work in communities all over West Virginia at one level or another. So you're trying to decide what are the strengths of your community, what assets do you want to build on? And before you leave that first conversation, it's really important to consider, here, I'm just gonna switch to the second slide here. So before you leave this first conversation, it's really important to consider who else should be involved. So even if there's really good attendance at your community discussion, there are always others whose voices and ideas and networks are not necessarily represented. So you'll always want to be thinking about that. So the main tips I want to give you about this part of the conversation is to be careful about that discussion of the past, that you don't stay there for too long. It's not to go back and rehash old grievances or place blame if your community is struggling. It's really for identifying those parts of the past that were valuable or that you want to recapture. And you might have to encourage participants to think really broadly about what's meant by the word asset. Some people think of tangible, specific resources, but there are probably a lot of human resources, a lot of talent that people can share. So you'll want to encourage them to think broadly about what the term asset can mean. The second conversation that you're going to have in your community, if you follow this basic outline and adapt it to your community's purposes, is where do you want to go? Now, I know your community is already going in a lot of directions and things are already happening. So one of the key things you're trying to do in this conversation is connect those things to each other to make sure that people are aware of other work that's happening. But then in this point in the conversation, you're really getting down into specifics of the issues you want to work on in your community. So in this part of the conversation about where do we want to go, you're looking for a range of options for where you want to go in your community. And some of these options are already being undertaken and some will be new ideas. So when you get really into what you think your community needs to work on, people won't be in complete agreement about how to approach the needs and the challenges and the issues that are prevalent in your community. So it's a chance for people to talk about their different perspectives about what should be done, or maybe even why the issue or the problem exists at all. And there will be tensions. And by tensions, I mean that people will realize that there are trade-offs and that there are different perspectives, even within individual people, about how your community should move forward. You'll have to be talking about the potential consequences here. And again, always before you would lead this discussion phase, consider who else should be involved. There will always be more people, voices, ideas that can be brought in. So the main tip I'd give you about this part of the discussion is to realize that depending upon the number of issues your community identifies to work on, you may not be able to accomplish all of that in one conversation. In fact, it's pretty unlikely that you'll be able to do that. Some communities that we're working with have already identified issues that they want to take up. And you may realize that you want to work on something in terms of local food economy or something related to an educational issue or health. So if you've identified multiple issues, you may need to plan additional conversations to go in depth in the areas in which you need additional exploration. Before you leave this conversation, though, you want to charge people with this question. What priorities for action should we come back to the next meeting with? And then that brings you to the third part of this discussion, which is how do we get there? And at this point, you're really getting down to the planning, the action planning that's going to take your community into meeting the goals and accomplishments that they hope for. Mainly in this section of the discussion, you're considering what's most important to work on. For example, you might say to each other, if we can't do everything at once, where should we start? There may be many good ideas and you're deciding among and between them. And you would anticipate some of the challenges and how you're going to deal with them. You'll be planning for specific next steps. And again, consider who else should be involved. The tip for this one is to keep the main focus on what you're going to do after the conversation. To put plans in place, it may be work groups, it may be ongoing collaborative efforts. Your community is going to decide how to organize itself to keep this work going and to accomplish the goals that have been prioritized. So at this point, we'd like to hear from you. So what questions has this raised in your mind? And Lauren with the Community Development Hub is going to facilitate this conversation. So take it away, Lauren.
Thanks, Catherine. We did get some questions that popped up in the group chat throughout the presentation. First one that I wanted to address was that the facilitation process sometimes brings up a lot of negativity. So are there some thoughts on that and how to get around it or how to get through it?
Yeah, so this is Mar. So one of the things I think to keep in mind is that part of this what's next conversation in general is meant to like build on the things that are working in your communities. So throughout the conversations, you want to make sure as a facilitator that you're keeping the conversation kind of around that, depending on what segment of the discussions you're in. But saying, what things in our community are working well and why are those things working well? Or in the past, what things worked well and why did those things work well? So keeping those things in mind, but then you can always also take questions out of our discussion guide and tailor them more to your specific community. And you can frame those in a way that focuses more on positive aspects. So that, as a facilitator, those are the things that you can do. I don't know, Catherine, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, I think I would add that the Center for Civic Life and I think to a large degree the Community Development Hub are invested in a philosophy of community development that's focused on assets. So what do we have to build on? And there's a whole school of thought and information about asset-based community development. I would encourage you to Google just that, asset-based community development, or reach out to us and we can provide you with additional materials that reflect all of the thinking that people have been doing all over the world about that very difficult question of, it's not always successful to lead with the problems and lead with the challenges. It's important to acknowledge them, but that's not the focus of what we're calling asset-based community development work.
Thanks, Catherine and Mar, for answering those. Also, at the beginning of our webinar, when we had our introduction, we had a good question about just bringing more people into the conversation about the important issues in our communities through these forums. So how do we, start to get more people to the table?
Yeah, so this is Catherine speaking, and that's a really good question, and that's always, the challenge when you're trying to convene community conversations. There are lots of things to keep in mind. So my background is in communications, and I'm happy to brainstorm with you on an individual basis about outreach strategies. You want to just make sure that you're not just focusing on publicity. There's a distinction between publicity and outreach. So publicity would be something like sending a press release to your local newspaper to get it into the newspaper. Outreach includes one-on-one asks, one-on-one invitations. One-on-one invitations are absolutely the best way to bring people out. So keep that in mind. There's also the issue of when you're putting together your planning team, you need to think about, okay, who needs to be at the table for these discussions? And you can kind of think backwards as you're forming your planning team. So, okay, single mothers, that's a really important population that we need to get at this at the table for the discussion, because they're an impacted community. They're impacted by the lack of economic development in the region, let's say. So, okay, that's who we want to get. So let's think backwards. Who can we get involved in the planning who will be able to, who's in that community and who will be able to then reach out, and they're in the best position to invite people similar to them. And as much as you can engage people in the planning that reflect the kind of people who you want to bring to the table, that will just be a huge asset as you move forward in your work. That's a little bit. I'll keep thinking, and if there's something else, I'll chime in. But I hope that helps.
Thanks, Catherine. I've got another really good question that I like to have answered from someone. So we're wondering if the What's Next West Virginia forums are only focused on economic endeavors.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question for this reason. I think when we talk about the economy and use that word, the economy, a certain set of things can come to mind. We might think about attracting a manufacturer that will provide jobs. We think about minimum wage, whatever it is. There's like a set of issues that surround that word, the economy. And What's Next West Virginia is certainly, focused on that. But I would say that there's also a way to think about this issue that is more based on wealth building. So wealth can come in many, many forms. The wealth of a community can be measured by, how people are how able people are to come together and talk through tough issues. It can mean having a community where you feel safe walking down the street. It can mean many, many things. So when we say the economy, what we're really talking about is building wealth. And wealth can be having, a healthy workforce. It's a really actually diverse set of issues that are brought to bear when you're talking about wealth building in a community. It's civic capacity. It's whether you have philanthropy engaged. So yes, What's Next is about the economy, but it's also about the overall health and wealth of communities. And so there's actually a ton of stuff that can fit under that umbrella.
All right, thank you so much, Catherine. That was a great answer. So now we've got about 15 minutes left in our, I guess 10 minutes probably in our question and answer series. So we're gonna try to do something with audio. So if you have a question that you wanna ask out loud, if you raise your flag, I will unmute you and you can speak to the group about the question that you have. So find the little flag icon, and if you have a question that has not been answered yet, that's still burning, you can raise that and then we can get some speakers here.
As you all are finding that flag, I did want to mention, somebody asked about participation and outreach. I think when we plan in communities for conversations like this, sometimes we think about, okay, well, we'll invite, to be a part of our planning team, we'll invite the leader of a local nonprofit, or we'll invite a government official who's affiliated with a specific department, or we'll invite a leader in the community who is affiliated with a bank, president of a bank, let's say. And those are all really important people to get to the table. But I think what we're really talking about when we say, bringing, involving more people and more community participation. So we're talking about the people who are unaffiliated, who don't have something underneath their name that's a title that directly relates to the issue, but they're experiencing life in the community. And as such, they have a ton to add. So when you're thinking about outreach and you're thinking about forming your planning team, think about those unaffiliated groups and who, so in West Virginia, you might not think about it, but one way to organize is through families. We're a strong, in this state, families are really important. So, is there a family member that that is essentially a leader of a community, a subgroup, but that isn't necessarily affiliated with an organization? So Lauren, did we have any questions from the group that you've seen?
I've not seen any flags raised, and I also want to let everyone know that this webinar is being recorded. So all of the information we will have posted for you, and you can also get in touch with the Center for Civic Life to talk more about any questions or concerns you have, and learn more about the What's Next West Virginia initiative.
Okay, well, if we don't have any more questions, then perhaps Mar, would you like to lead us through how people can get in touch in the various ways that we can keep this conversation going?
I would love to. So we have our get in touch slide, and there are several ways that you can keep in contact with us. The first is you can go to our website. That's the quickest and easiest way to do that. It has a ton of information, a ton of resources, like Catherine was talking about. And it also can link you to our email addresses if you'd like to get in touch with us that way. But we have a general what's next email. So if you have questions or want to let us know about something, you can email us at whatsnextwv@wvciviclife.org. We also have a Facebook page where we post a lot of stuff about the connections we've made, the people we've met, the things that we think that are interesting that are happening around the state. So you can follow us on facebook.com/whatsnextwv. You can also find us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is at whatsnextwv. Or you can call us if you have pressing questions or concerns, or you just want to talk to somebody, and that phone number is 304-344-3430.
So check our website if you would like to see a recording of this webinar, or if you would like the slide presentation. I'd just like to make one more plug about the element of what's next that has to do with storytelling. We're really looking to highlight some individuals, communities, organizations, businesses that are, leading the way in terms of innovation and thinking imaginatively about our future path together as a state, and all the potential that we have as our industries are changing here. So I would love to hear from you if you would like to have your story highlighted, or if you know of someone who you think would be a great storyteller. Because I think one of the major goals here is to make sure that we're not doing what we're doing in isolation. Somebody mentioned that we had some good statewide representation here, and I think, I live down in southern West Virginia, and I don't always really know what's going on in the upper in the northern Panhandle and vice versa. But we're all in this together. So with with West Virginia Public Broadcasting as one of our partners, we really have an amazing opportunity and a mouthpiece that we can use to spread information about what's working and what's not working and why, and provide hope and to people, and to provide warnings in some cases. We tried this, it didn't work, here's why. So please consider, as you're going through, as you're going about your work, and as these conversations are unfolding, get in touch with me. You can use our website, the share your story form, or give us a call, whatever way you'd like to get in touch. So I will close us out, and unless there are any other questions, I just want to say thanks to everybody for being with us for the hour, and thanks in advance for all the work that you're doing in your community and that you're going to do. We really want to be in an ongoing relationship with people as they take the conversations forward. We'd like to provide any assistance we can to help you get conversations started. And we're really especially interested in capturing what you're doing in your community so that can be shared. So as much as a dialogue and action initiative, this is a learning initiative. And there are interesting and innovative things happening all over the state, and we want to spend some time talking and learning with you so that what's next can be of use not only to your community, but all over the state. So we'll be planning additional webinars on different topics. We've done 2 now on facilitation, and we'll be keeping in touch through emails and news blasts about those. You can go to our website if you'd like to download a recording of today's webinar or the slides. You can sign up for our email newsletter there, and just to make sure that you get all of our future notices. So let us know if there are other things that you need. And thank you all so much for participating today, and thank you to Lauren of the Hub for facilitating this, and to Mar for her tips and instruction. Have a great evening, folks, and we'll be talking to you soon, I hope.
Yes, thank you all very much.